Imagine complete, absolute darkness. Not the kind you find in a city where the sky is lit up by lights, but real, primitive darkness, where the sound of your own breathing seems deafening. In this darkness, there are no lanterns, no candles, not even moonlight, hidden behind thick clouds. For Stone Age man, such a night was not just a time of day, but a state of the world, full of hidden threats and uncertainty. Fire was the only boundary between safety and chaos, warmth and piercing cold. To be without it meant to face the ancient world alone, without your main ally. Watch the video to the end to find out which method of making fire required precision and why even the most experienced groups of people sometimes preferred to carry a smoldering ember for weeks rather than try to light a new fire. The human eye is not adapted to absolute darkness. In the absence of light, the world shrinks to the limits of hearing and touch, turning into a space of guesswork and assumptions. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves in such conditions is perceived as a potential threat. In complete darkness, hearing is heightened to the limit. A distant howl, a barely discernible rustle in the grass, or the crunch of gravel under someone's paw become the main sources of information. This auditory overload keeps the nervous system in constant tension, not allowing a moment's rest. Nonverbal communication based on facial expressions and gestures disappears. In the dark, it is impossible to see the expression on the face of the person you are talking to catch a sign of approval or warning. Social ties within the group weaken, and everyone withdraws into their own dark world. The perception of space is distorted beyond recognition. Without visual landmarks, even a familiar cave or campsite becomes a labyrinth. The feeling of confinement is mixed with a fear of the open, invisible spaces around. The psychological pressure of continuous darkness was enormous. The lack of visual landmarks disrupted the sense of balance and direction, causing constant tension. People were forced to rely solely on memory and hearing to navigate even their own shelter. Sleep becomes intermittent and restless. Any sudden noise causes you to wake up in a state of complete alertness. Proper rest, necessary to recover from daytime treks and hunting, becomes impossible. This constant vigilance was mentally and physically exhausting. A night without fire was not a time of rest, but long hours of anxious anticipation of dawn. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the psychological impact of complete darkness on modern humans? Write about it in the comments. Fire production in the Stone Age was not magic, but a complex technological process that required knowledge, patience, and the right materials. There were two main methods: striking sparks and obtaining heat through friction. Both required considerable skill and careful preparation. The striking method was based on the use of two minerals, flint and pyrite. Flint, due to its hardness and ability to produce sharp chips, served as a striker. When struck sharply with its sharp edge against pyrite, a shower of bright, hot sparks was produced. Pyrite, or iron sulfide, is a mineral with a high iron content. It was the microscopic particles of iron that flew off upon impact that ignited upon contact with air. Finding a suitable piece of pyrite was a stroke of luck. It was carefully stored and carried in leather pouches. The most important component was tinder, a highly flammable material that had to catch the spark. Dried tinder, fungi, crushed dry moss, or fluffed plant fibers were used as tinder. The tinder was carefully prepared in advance and kept completely dry. The process required precision. The tinder had to be placed as close as possible to the striking point so that the spark would hit it. After the spark ignited the tinder, it began to smolder slowly and had to be carefully fanned by bringing a bundle of dry grass or thin twigs close to it. The friction method was based on the conversion of mechanical energy into heat. The simplest option was to use a hand drill, a straight, sturdy rod made of hard wood. It was quickly rotated between the palms, with the end pressed into a small depression in a board made of softer wood. Intense friction at the point of contact produced hot wood dust. A V-shaped groove was specially cut into the baseboard, where the dust was collected. After a while, it reached the temperature of smoldering and turned into a small ember. This work was extremely tedious. It required endurance, strong hands, and constant pressure on the drill. Often, several people worked in shifts to maintain the necessary rotation speed until the desired result was achieved. A more advanced technology was the bow method. A bow with a string wrapped around the drill once allowed it to be rotated much faster and with less effort. The upper end of the drill was held in place by a special stone or bone stop that a person held in their hand. This technology significantly sped up the process and increased the chances of success even under less than ideal conditions. However, it required the manufacture of more parts: a bow, a drill, a stop, and a baseboard. In the next chapter, you will learn about a method that was even more reliable but required rare materials. Starting a fire was such a laborious and unpredictable task that keeping it going often became a more important task. Losing a fire due to rain or carelessness was much easier than starting a new one. Therefore, Stone Age people developed a whole system for carrying and maintaining smoldering coals. The basis of this system was the so-called slow wick. Materials that could smolder very slowly, giving off heat but not burning completely for many hours, were used for this purpose. The ideal material for this was the tinder fungus, which grew on tree trunks. The fungus was cut, dried, and sometimes boiled in ashes to improve its smoldering properties. The internal porous structure of the fungus allowed it to smolder very slowly, almost imperceptibly. One small piece of prepared tinder fungus could retain heat for up to half a day. Special containers were used to carry the fire. These could be hollowed-out horns of large animals, large seashells, or specially made clay vessels with holes for air access. The container protected the smoldering material from wind and moisture. A layer of dry moss or grass was placed inside the container as insulation. A smoldering piece of tinder fungus was placed on top. Upon arriving at a new campsite, it was enough to take out this ember and fan it in a bundle of dry hay to get a full-fledged fire in a few minutes. The role of firekeeper was one of the most responsible in the group. This person, often an experienced woman, had to constantly monitor the condition of the coals, add new tinder in time, and protect the container from any accidents. Losing the fire on the way could be a disaster, especially during long journeys or in the cold season. The first and most obvious threat of a night without fire was the cold. During the Ice Age, temperatures could drop to extreme levels, and the biting wind intensified its effect. Without a source of heat, the human body began to lose energy rapidly. The body responded to the cold by constricting the blood vessels in the extremities to conserve heat for vital organs. This led to rapid freezing of the fingers and toes. As a result, people lost the ability to perform even the simplest tasks requiring fine motor skills, such as tying knots or making tools. In search of protection from the cold, people used natural shelters. Caves, rock overhangs, and thickets could provide some protection from the wind, but they did not save people from the low temperatures. Groups of people huddled together in tight clusters, trying to warm each other with their body heat. Clothing made from animal skins provided some protection, but its effectiveness was limited. In wet weather or after crossing a river, the fur would get wet, and without the ability to dry it by the fire, any moisture would turn the clothing into an icy shell. This frozen layer only accelerated heat loss. Sleeping in such conditions was dangerous. Deep sleep could cause a person to stop shivering, which is the body's natural reaction to generate heat. This was a sure sign of critical hypothermia. Even if one managed to survive the night, the effects of the cold would be felt the next day. Frozen muscles became unresponsive, and joints lost their mobility. The effectiveness of hunting and gathering declined sharply, threatening the food supply of the entire group. What other hidden problems do you think the cold created for Stone Age people? In the next chapter, you will learn about another deadly threat posed by darkness. Fire was not only a source of heat, but also the main means of protection. The bright flames, the crackling of burning logs, and the thick smoke deterred the large predators that dominated the Stone Age night world. Without this protective barrier, the human camp became defenseless. The night world belonged to them. Excellent night vision, keen sense of smell, and silent movement gave predators a huge advantage. Humans, on the other hand, were practically blind and could only rely on their hearing to detect approaching danger from a distance. The night was filled with sounds, each of which could be a harbinger of trouble. Growling, howling, the crunch of branches under heavy paws. All this kept people in a state of constant stress. The inability to see the source of the sound only intensified the fear. Without fire, camouflage became the only tactic for survival. People huddled in the farthest corners of caves, trying not to make any noise. The group transformed from hunters into potential prey, awaiting their fate. Even if there was no direct attack, the presence of predators nearby was a huge problem. They could scare away all the game in the area, depriving people of their food source for the next few days. Sometimes predators would simply circle around the camp, keeping everyone awake until morning. Fire also allowed them to survey the surroundings. Its light reflected in the eyes of animals, revealing their presence in the darkness. Without a fire, people were completely deprived of this opportunity and could not know what was happening just a few steps away from their shelter. The absence of fire meant that it was impossible to cook food. This created several serious problems that directly affected health and survival. The human digestive system was not ideally suited to a completely raw diet. Raw meat was extremely tough and fibrous. Eating it required strong jaws and a great deal of time to chew. This process itself took a lot of energy that the body could have spent on other needs. Digesting raw meat was also energy intensive. Fire essentially begins the process of external digestion by breaking down proteins and fats before food even reaches the stomach. Without this, the digestive system had to work twice as hard while absorbing far fewer nutrients. Many edible plants, especially root vegetables and tubers, contain toxins or substances that the human body cannot digest when raw. Heat treatment breaks down these compounds, making food safe and unlocking its nutritional value. Without fire, people's diets were significantly reduced to a small number of fruits and leaves. In addition, fire killed pathogenic bacteria and parasite larvae contained in raw meat, especially in the meat of fallen animals. Eating unprocessed foods significantly increased the risk of serious illness. In the absence of medicine, any intestinal infection could be fatal to a group. Water from rivers and lakes also posed a danger. Boiling was the only reliable way to disinfect it. Without fire, people had to take risks by consuming water that could contain invisible threats. What other everyday tasks became impossible without fire? In the next chapter, we will examine how the absence of fire affected technology. Fire was not just a convenience, but a key element of technological progress in the Stone Age. With its help, people processed materials that were inaccessible to other methods. The absence of fire meant not just a halt, but a setback in the development of many vital technologies. Spear and javelin tips made of wood became much stronger after being burned over a fire. The wood was slowly turned over the flames, drying it and making the surface layer hard, almost like bone. Without this procedure, the wooden tip quickly became blunt and broke on impact. Stone tools also required fire. Some types of flint became more malleable after controlled heating. This allowed for finer and sharper chips, creating perfect knives, scrapers, and arrowheads. One of the greatest inventions, impossible without fire, was birch tar, the world's first glue. It was obtained by slowly heating birch bark in a pit without access to air. This viscous black glue was indispensable for attaching stone tips to shafts, providing a strong and secure connection. Without glue, the tips had to be tied with tendons or plant fibers. Such fastenings were much less reliable, often came loose, and required constant repair. The effectiveness of hunting weapons was sharply reduced. Fire was also used to process bone and antler. Steaming over a fire made these materials more pliable, allowing them to be bent and shaped as needed. This is how fishing hooks, needles, and other small but important items were made. With the onset of darkness, any productive activity requiring vision came to a complete halt. Without the light of a fire, people could not make or repair tools, sew clothes from skins, or cut up the carcasses they had brought back from the hunt. Night became lost time that could only be spent in immobility. Even the simplest assistance was impossible. In the dark, it was impossible to examine a wound, remove a splinter, or apply a bandage. Any injury sustained in the evening was left unattended until morning. The light of the fire was the center of social life. The whole group gathered around it to share the events of the day, tell stories, and pass on experience and knowledge to the younger generation. The fire created an atmosphere of comfort, safety, and unity. The flames were the living center of the community. Watching them dance, people relaxed, socialized, and planned future activities. It was around the campfire that social bonds were strengthened, disputes were resolved, and collective decisions were made. In the darkness, social life came to a standstill. Each person was left alone with their thoughts and fears, isolated from others. The absence of a common center of attraction made the group disjointed and psychologically vulnerable. Fire served as an important landmark in the night landscape. The smoke from the campfire during the day and the bright flames at night were visible for many kilometers. This allowed hunters or gatherers who had strayed from the group to find their way back to the camp and not get lost in the vast, monotonous spaces. Without such a beacon, any foray away from camp became risky. With the onset of twilight, finding the way back became an almost impossible task. One had to wait out the night alone, exposed to all the dangers of the wild. Signal fires were one of the first forms of long-distance communication. By placing them on high ground, it was possible to transmit simple but important messages over long distances. For example, a single column of smoke could mean "all is well," while several could mean "alert" or "help needed." This system made it possible to coordinate the actions of several groups of hunters or to warn neighboring camps about the movement of large predators or hostile tribes. Without fire, this early warning network ceased to exist. Groups of people found themselves completely isolated from each other. Fire was not just a source of comfort, but a fundamental tool that allowed Stone Age people to create a safer and healthier living environment. Its impact on hygiene, medicine, and food security was so great that it can be described as a real revolution in survival. Without fire, human groups would have been much more vulnerable to disease, starvation, and the effects of adverse weather. Water was a source of life, but at the same time a hidden threat. Rivers, lakes, and standing water bodies contained an invisible world of microorganisms, many of which were capable of causing serious diseases. For Stone Age people, who had no concept of bacteria, water from an untested source was a real lottery. Boiling became the first and most reliable method of purifying water. This did not require metal utensils. People used the so-called stone kettle method. Stones heated on a fire were lowered into a pit lined with durable animal skin and filled with water. The process was impressive and required skill. The stones were heated in the fire until red hot and then quickly transferred to the water with special wooden tongs. Upon contact with the hot surface, the water around the stone instantly boiled, filling the pit with steam and hissing. Several such heated stones, lowered into the water one after another, could bring a significant volume of liquid to a boil. This process not only destroyed harmful microorganisms, but also gave people access to warm water. Warm drinks in cold weather helped to keep warm and save the body's precious energy. During the warm season, especially near forests and water bodies, life turned into a constant struggle with swarms of insects. Mosquitoes, midges, horseflies, and gnats were not just an annoyance. Their bites caused itching and inflammation, and they themselves were carriers of disease. Fire provided a unique means of protection: smoke. People noticed that thick, acrid smoke repelled most flying insects. To achieve this, they learned to build slow-burning, smoky fires rather than hot, bright ones. Such a smoke trap was lit using not dry firewood, but wet branches, damp leaves, or bunches of fresh grass. These materials did not burn, but smoldered slowly, emitting a huge amount of smoke. The smoke trap was placed on the windward side of the camp, so that the smoke constantly enveloped the living space. Living in such a smoky cloud was perhaps not the most pleasant experience, but it provided enormous relief. People could calmly go about their business, processing skins, making tools, or simply resting. The smoke created an area free from constant buzzing and painful bites. Constant dampness was another enemy of humans in the Stone Age. Wet clothing made of skins not only ceased to keep people warm, but also led to rapid hypothermia. Constant contact of damp clothing with the skin caused irritation and contributed to the development of fungal infections. The heat of the fire was the only way to dry things quickly and effectively. Special frames were built around the fire from branches on which wet clothes, fur bedding, and tanned skins were hung. This required constant monitoring to prevent the items from catching fire. Not only clothes were dried, but also the dwelling itself. The fire burning in the cave dried the walls, preventing the formation of mold. A dry microclimate was much healthier and more comfortable for living, especially for sleeping. Drying was also important for preserving materials. Wet hides and leather quickly began to rot and fall apart. Regular drying by the fire significantly extended the life of clothing, shoes, and other essential items, which took a lot of time and effort to make. One of the main problems was the instability of food resources. A successful hunt for large animals yielded a huge amount of meat that could not be eaten in one go. Without means of preservation, the surplus simply disappeared after a few days. Fire provided two revolutionary methods of preserving food: drying and smoking. To dry meat, it was cut into thin, long strips and hung on frames over a low smoldering fire. The slow heat gradually removed moisture from the meat, depriving bacteria of their breeding ground. Meat dried in this way became light, firm, and could be stored for months. It was the first concentrated and long-lasting product in human history. Such supplies could be taken on long journeys or used during periods when hunting was unsuccessful. Smoking was an even more sophisticated method. The meat was also hung over a fire, but in thick smoke from certain types of wood, such as alder or oak. The smoke not only dried the meat, but also impregnated it with substances that had antibacterial properties. Smoked meat lasted even longer than just dried meat and was better protected from bugs. This technique let people build up strategic food reserves. It broke the vicious cycle of feasting and famine, making sure they could survive long winters or other tough times. A night in the Stone Age without fire was not just an inconvenience. It was a confrontation with the primitive world in its harshest form. Cold, predators, hunger, and all-consuming darkness turned every night into a test of endurance. Fire was not just a technology, but the foundation of civilization. It provided warmth, light, protection, safe food, and the opportunity to develop. It was the control of fire that became one of the key steps that allowed humans to stand out from the animal world and begin their journey to the top. Which aspect of survival without fire did you find the most difficult? What do you think was scarier? Cold, hunger, or the constant threat of predators? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the past.